At dawn, the courtroom atmosphere shifted. The judge announced a devastating finding, something that threatens the very foundation of the Comey case.
What prosecutors called a clerical fix is now viewed as a fatal flaw. The grand jury never saw the final indictment. That alone could void everything.
2 hours of grand jury proceedings missing. No audio, no transcript, no record. The judge repeatedly asked, "How is this possible?" Prosecutors had no answer.
Okay, hold on. Stop whatever you're doing, because what just dropped out of federal court this morning is not normal. It's not routine. It's not, oh, another filing. No, this is the kind of ruling that blows up an entire prosecution before lunchtime. And Trump's DOJ is already in full-blown panic mode, pretending this is fine. Spoiler, it's absolutely not fine. Because here's what happened. A federal judge, not a pundit, not a commentator, a federal judge just signaled that the Comey indictment, the one Trump has been screaming for since 2017, might not even be legally valid. Not weak, not complicated, I mean invalid, as in structurally defective, procedurally broken, thrown out the window level invalid. And the reaction inside Trump's DOJ, you can practically hear the meltdown through the walls. And here's the part they really hoped wouldn't leak. The judge didn't just raise concerns, he raised the nuclear concern that the grand jury, the group legally required to approve an indictment, never actually saw the final version prosecutors filed. And if you think I'm exaggerating, I'm not. Prosecutors admitted this out loud, in court, on the record. Yes, they took an indictment the grand jury rejected, patched it, cut it, glued it, stapled it, whatever they did, and then only got 2 stray jurors to sign the fix after everyone else had already gone home. 2. Not 12, not 14, 2. That is so far outside the law that every legal analyst watching this case basically stopped breathing at the same moment.
And you want to know the worst part? This didn't happen in some backwater court. This happened in the Eastern District of Virginia, the Rocket Docket, the court that doesn't play games, doesn't tolerate nonsense, and does not let prosecutors improvise indictments like they're editing a Google Doc at 2 a.m. This judge took one look at that and said, "Explain this, now." And the DOJ, they had nothing, absolutely nothing. Lindsey Halligan, Trump's hand-picked prosecutor who has somehow turned incompetence into a professional skill set, literally admitted she didn't have a transcript because, quote, the grand jury had gone home. That's the defense. That's what they walked into federal court with. And yeah, this is wild. But here's the part nobody's talking about yet. And it's the part Trump's team is terrified of. If this indictment is ruled invalid, that's it. The statute of limitations is done. They don't get a redo. They don't get a mulligan. There is no fix it and refile. This case dies instantly. And Trump loses the one prosecution he has personally demanded for years. And trust me, judges do not drop hints like the ones that came out this morning, unless they're preparing everyone for what's coming. This wasn't subtle. This wasn't gentle. This was a judicial warning shot that landed straight in the center of Trump's DOJ, and they know it. But that's not even the part that's going to ignite Washington, because the next thing the judge said is honestly shocking, and it changes everything.
Okay, hold on. The entire prosecution here is under heavy fire now because the judge didn't just question the indictment, he questioned whether this entire prosecution was even independent. Think about how insane that is. When was the last time you saw a federal judge ask, basically, hey, are you just doing what Trump told you to do? Because that's what happened. Out loud, in a courtroom, in front of DOJ attorneys. And the look on their faces told you everything. They were not ready for that question. But let me back up for 1 second, because this is the part the DOJ desperately hoped the public wouldn't connect. The timeline. If you line up Trump's public posts, the secret memo, the prosecutor switch, and the rush to indict, it's a straight line. Not curved, not debatable, a straight line. Trump goes online, demands the indictment of all my enemies, including Comey. He names Lindsey Halligan specifically in his message, and somehow, magically, she becomes the prosecutor. The previous prosecutor leaves, or is pushed out, pick whichever version you prefer. A week later, Comey gets indicted. And today, the judge basically said, walk me through how this is not Trump calling the shots. And yeah, that's wild, because here's the part they thought nobody would notice. The DOJ didn't even try to deny Trump's involvement. They didn't say, that's absurd, or there's no connection, or this case was built independently. No. They said, and I'm quoting, she's not a puppet. That's the defense. That's their big argument. She's not a puppet. Which, by the way, is what you say when you don't actually have an argument. Nobody confident in their independence have ever used the word puppet voluntarily.
But the judge didn't let it slide. He kept pressing. How did she get assigned? Why her? Why after the social media post? Why after Trump demanded her by name? What conversations happened? Why did the prior prosecutor quit? All questions the DOJ clearly did not want to answer. And that's when the next bomb dropped. The, quote, secret memo. And no, I'm not exaggerating this for dramatic effect. The DOJ accidentally admitted there is a memo, a real one, written by career prosecutors in the Eastern District of Virginia, recommending against charging Comey at all. Not hesitation, not mixed opinion, recommending against charges. And what did DOJ leadership do? They buried it. They refused to turn it over. And again, this isn't speculation. They admitted in court that they were instructed by Todd Blanche, Trump's number 2 at DOJ, to keep it hidden. Okay, hold on. This is the Department of Justice. You don't bury memos because they're inconvenient. You don't ignore career prosecutors because Trump wants a scalp. You don't hide exculpatory evidence from the defense because it contradicts your political mission. But they did, and the judge knows they did. And that is why this morning's ruling is so devastating, because it doesn't just undermine the indictment, it undermines the entire prosecution strategy. It turns the DOJ into the defendant, and that is a position no prosecutor ever wants to be in. Because think about the downstream consequences. If a federal judge finds this was a vindictive prosecution, or even finds substantial indicators of vindictive prosecution, every other Trump-demanded case becomes radioactive. It sets a precedent. You cannot use the DOJ as your personal revenge machine. And Trump has been treating the DOJ like a customized weapon system since his first term. So if this case blows up because of vindictive prosecution, it opens the door for motions in other cases where Trump clearly pressured prosecutors. And here's what this actually means. Trump's DOJ didn't just botch an indictment. They may have set off a chain reaction that threatens every politically motivated case they're trying to push right now. This is what happens when you let a political agenda bleed into federal prosecutions. You break the rule book, you cut corners, you hide memos, you lie to judges, and eventually, like today, a judge catches you. But stay with me, because it gets even stranger. Because buried inside the judge's questioning was something nobody expected, a direct reference to Gaither versus United States, a case that only gets cited when an indictment has a structural defect so severe it can't be saved. You don't cite Gaither casually. You cite Gaither when you're telling prosecutors your indictment may literally be void, not flawed, not weak, void, like it never existed. And that's why the DOJ's panic this morning felt so palpable. They weren't worried about losing emotion. They were worried about losing the whole case because of something so basic, it borders on amateur hour incompetence, failing to bring the final indictment to a grand jury.
Let's be clear. This is not a technicality. This is not a paperwork error. This is not, oh, prosecutors messed up a form. This is a constitutional requirement. Grand juries exist because the government cannot just fabricate charges. They must be approved by a group of citizens, a buffer between the state and the accused. If prosecutors bypass that buffer, the indictment is dead on arrival. And somehow, unbelievably, that is exactly what Trump's DOJ did. And when Halligan was asked why, her answer was the quiet part out loud. The grand jury had gone home. That's it. That's the explanation. The legally required process wasn't followed because everyone went home. Imagine a surgeon saying, yeah, we skipped the anesthesia because the nurse clocked out early. That is the level of absurdity we are dealing with here. And what does that tell you? It tells you the rush to indict was political. It tells you they were racing the statute of limitations. It tells you they were under pressure. It tells you they knew the legal case wasn't strong enough, so they took shortcuts. And in federal court, shortcuts are deadly. But here's the part that sets this entire situation on fire. The judge didn't just grill them. He ordered them to file a written explanation today detailing exactly how the two indictments came into existence, who drafted the second one, why the grand jury never saw it, and why the DOJ claimed no transcript exists. That is the definition of bad news for prosecutors. Judges demand written explanations when they are building a record, the kind you use to justify dismissals, sanctions, or referrals. And yes, bar referrals are absolutely on the table here.
Because misleading the court, or worse, misleading the court while prosecuting a former FBI director, is not something the legal system shrugs off. It's career-ending, it's reputation-destroying, and the judge knows it. But that's not even the most shocking part. Because what happened next, and what the DOJ didn't see coming, changes everything. Because right when the DOJ thought the damage was contained, when they thought the judge's questions were the worst of it, he pivoted, and that pivot is what detonated the entire room. He didn't ask about transcripts. He didn't ask about signatures. He went straight to the heart of the prosecution with one sentence. Explain why there are two indictments. Not clarify, not walk me through, not help me understand. Explain why there are two indictments. And the expression on Lindsey Halligan's face said everything, because she knew that question wasn't coming. She knew once the judge asked that, the game was over. And she also knew that the moment she opened her mouth, she had to either admit the truth or lie to a federal judge on the record. Spoiler, neither choice saves this prosecution. But what happened next was even more unbelievable. The DOJ's other prosecutor, the one they brought in as a backup or a credential booster or whatever role they thought he'd play, Tyler Lemons, who was sworn in practically yesterday, jumped in to clarify, and his clarification was basically a confession. He said the second indictment was created because the first one had issues and that they needed to address them quickly. Quickly! As in rush, as in panic, as in the statute of limitations expires in 36 hours and Trump wants this done.
And here's the part that really set off alarm bells. He admitted they didn't gather the full grand jury because, again, they had already gone home. This wasn't speculation. This wasn't implied. He said it. He confessed to a defective indictment. And the judge didn't even hide his reaction. He looked up, paused, and repeated the words slowly, almost like he wanted them etched into the transcript. You filed an indictment the grand jury did not review? That line could end the case by itself. But stay with me, because what happened after that is honestly one of the most surreal moments you will ever see in court. Lemons tried to pivot away, to soften it, to spin it. He said something like, well, the foreperson signed it, and the judge cut him off. That never happens unless the judge is furious. He said the foreperson is not the grand jury. And if you know anything about federal judges, you know that's basically a controlled explosion in sentence form. At that point, the DOJ attorneys looked like they were hoping for a fire alarm to go off or a meteor to hit the courthouse, anything to get them out of that moment. And it gets worse, because then the judge asked, where is the transcript from that 2-hour window? And Halligan had to repeat the same line that already made the legal world gasp. There is no transcript. None. Zero. A 2-hour period in which an indictment was supposedly finalized with no record of anything said or done. That's not negligence. That's not bad luck. That is legally impossible unless something improper happened. And yes, this is wild, because you could feel the courtroom collectively realize what this meant. If there is no transcript, then there is no proof the grand jury was ever reconvened. And if the grand jury was never reconvened, then the final indictment is a legal ghost. It only exists because prosecutors typed it up and slapped signatures on it. Now, remember what came next, because this is where the DOJ really started losing control. Comey's lawyer stood up, almost giddy at this point, and said, Your Honor, there is no indictment. Not there is a defective indictment, not there's a procedural issue, but there is no indictment. And honestly, he's not wrong. If the document filed in court isn't the one the grand jury approved, it legally doesn't exist. And the judge didn't disagree. That's the devastating part. He didn't say, counsel, calm down. He didn't say, let's not overstate this. He didn't say it's premature. He said nothing. He let that statement hang in the air like a wrecking ball.
But even that wasn't the breaking point. The breaking point was what the judge said next, because he asked the one question every prosecutor fears more than anything. Is this the result of political pressure? You could hear people inhale. You could practically hear the DOJ attorneys' souls exiting their bodies. This was the question they hoped would never be spoken, but there it was. And look, they had outs. They could have said, "No, Your Honor, Trump's posts had no bearing. This case was developed independently. This was a standard prosecutorial decision." But they didn't say any of that. Instead, Lemons muttered some nonsense about she is not a puppet, which is ironically exactly what a puppet says. It's the "I'm not owned" of legal arguments. It convinced no one.
And then the twist nobody saw coming, the judge asked directly about Trump's social media demands. Not just referenced, asked directly. He said he is evaluating evidence suggesting Trump named Halligan publicly as the person he wanted prosecuting Comey after the previous prosecutor refused. That is devastating for the DOJ. It obliterates any claim to independence. It paints the entire prosecution as retaliatory. And in the legal world, retaliatory prosecution is the bright red line you do not cross. But let's talk about the other landmine sitting right under this case, the statute of limitations. The DOJ is acting as if this is some small technicality that can be patched up later. It's not. The statute of limitations is like a guillotine. Once the blade drops, you can't lift it back up. If this indictment is ruled invalid, the case is dead. Not dying, dead. And Trump's DOJ knows that. That's why they cut corners. That's why they rushed. That's why they skipped the grand jury. That's why they hid the memo. They were running out of time, and Trump was running out of patience. And by the way, that memo, the one recommending against charges, that's not a side issue. That's a bomb waiting to go off. Because if it turns out DOJ leadership overrode career prosecutors specifically because Trump wanted a scalp, this stops being a courtroom crisis. It becomes a scandal, a full-blown scandal. And after today's ruling, we are one step away from that memo being ordered into the record.
But here's where it gets even stranger, because the judge didn't stop at the indictment, or the memo, or the political pressure. He questioned Halligan personally, asked whether she even had the authority to act as U.S. attorney when she filed the indictment. And you could see in real time the DOJ realizing if her appointment is invalid, every action she took is invalid, which again leads us to the same place. No indictment, no case, no prosecution. Everything is hanging by a single thread. But here's the part the media still hasn't wrapped their head around, and it's the part that turns this into a 5-alarm fire. If the judge rules this indictment invalid, he isn't just letting Comey walk. He's declaring that Trump's DOJ abused its power to target a political opponent. That is a historical level rebuke. That is a precedent-setting rebuke. That is something that will be cited for decades whenever a president tries to weaponize the Justice Department. And right now, based on everything we saw in the courtroom, that ruling isn't just possible, it's likely. But stay with me, because the most dangerous moment of the entire hearing happened at the very end, and the DOJ never saw it coming. And just when everyone thought the judge had unloaded every possible question, every possible legal grenade, he dropped the one that froze the entire courtroom. Who instructed you not to turn over the internal memo?
That was it. That was the moment everything snapped, because that question doesn't come from nowhere. Judges don't ask that unless they already know the answer, or unless someone in chambers told them exactly where to look. And the second he asked it, the DOJ attorneys looked like kids caught stealing from the vending machine by the principal. No eye contact, no movement, no breathing, just panic. And here's why that question matters. If prosecutors withheld exculpatory material intentionally, that's not a mistake, that's not oversight, that's misconduct, full stop. Judges can sanction, dismiss cases, and refer prosecutors to bar authorities for that. And in politically sensitive prosecutions like this, judges treat that like a controlled explosion. So, who answered?
Tyler Lemons, again, the rookie that keeps sending into verbal gunfights with a butter knife, said he was instructed by Todd Blanche, the Trump-aligned 2 at DOJ. So there it is, confirmation. A political appointee overrode career prosecutors, blocked the defense from getting a memo that undermines the entire case, and then tossed the rookie into court to take the blame for it. And the judge? He didn't hide his reaction. He leaned back, looked down at his notes, and said, "I see." Judges don't have to yell. When they say "I see," that's the legal version of "congratulations, you just set your own house on fire."
Because here's what the judge is putting together, and he's doing it in real time, right in front of everyone. The DOJ rushed the indictment. They fabricated a second version without a grand jury. They hid internal opposition. They buried a memo. They assigned a prosecutor Trump demanded publicly. They ignored standard procedure. And now they're lying about it through flustered rookies and incoherent explanations. It's the perfect storm of political interference. And the judge knows exactly what it looks like. But stay with me, because the next moment was even more shocking. Comey's defense attorney stood up, not even pretending to hold back anymore, and said, "Your Honor, this prosecution is tainted from top to bottom." And the judge didn't interrupt. He didn't push back. He didn't chastise him. He let him talk. That never happens if a judge thinks you're exaggerating. That's when you knew. This isn't just a rough hearing for DOJ. This is an unraveling. Then the judge pulled out one more knife, and he used it. He asked, why did the previous prosecutor resign? And suddenly, the courtroom turned into a collective statue. No one moved, no one breathed. You know why? Because the previous prosecutor, the one who refused to bring charges, reportedly objected to the political pressure. And the DOJ does not want that documented on the record under oath. But the judge already knows that answer too. He's just waiting for them to say it out loud. And here's where everything flips upside down. Judges don't usually care about the politics surrounding a case. They care about the law. But when the politics become the law, when political interference destroys the legal process, judges act. And that's exactly what's happening here.
Prosecutors weren't just sloppy, they weren't just incompetent, they weren't just rushing. It looks like they were carrying out political instructions, and that's not just bad procedure, that's unconstitutional. But this is where the DOJ's nightmare gets even worse, because the judge is building a record, line by line, question by question. He's creating the foundation for one of 3 possible outcomes: dismissal with prejudice, referral for prosecutorial misconduct, or a ruling that confirms Trump tried to weaponize DOJ. And all 3 are devastating for Trump's narrative. And let's talk about dismissal for a second. Not every case gets that. Judges avoid that unless the conduct is so outrageous, so unacceptable, that nothing else can fix it. You don't dismiss a federal indictment because of negligence. You dismiss it because the prosecution violated the core principles of justice. And right now, that's exactly what this looks like. But the DOJ had one last Hail Mary attempt. Halligan tried to argue that the essence of the indictment was approved by the grand jury. The judge didn't even let her finish. He cut her off and said the law does not recognize essence. Either the grand jury approved it or it didn't. That was the moment the case died. It didn't die when the transcript went missing. It didn't die when only 2 jurors signed the revised indictment. It died when the judge said in plain English that the law simply does not support anything they're trying to argue. But we're still not done, because the judge then ordered something prosecutors dread: a same-day written explanation. When a judge orders same-day filings, it means he wants the government on record immediately, before they can coordinate spin, before they can rewrite history, before anyone higher up can intervene.
It means the judge is making a timeline that shows political motive, a timeline that shows misconduct, a timeline that shows legal failure. And if you think he's doing that casually, you haven't been in a federal courtroom. Judges do that when they're preparing to write a ruling that could make headlines. And yes, this one will. Because you know what comes next? The judge is going to ask himself one final question. Did the DOJ act independently? If the answer is no, and based on everything we saw, the answer is absolutely no, then dismissal isn't just possible, it's inevitable. And imagine the fallout when that happens. Trump loses the Comey case. Trump loses his revenge narrative. The DOJ gets humiliated. A judge confirms political interference. And suddenly every other targeted prosecution Trump is pushing gets looked at differently. This isn't just a legal failure. This is a political implosion. And the judge knows exactly how big this ruling will be. That's why he's being methodical. That's why he's documenting everything. That's why he's forcing DOJ to answer questions they never wanted to confront. He is building the ruling, piece by piece, sentence by sentence. And when it lands, it's going to hit like a sledgehammer. Because here is the truth. This morning didn't just threaten Trump's DOJ, it exposed it. And now the question isn't whether this indictment survives, it's whether the entire prosecution collapses under the weight of its own misconduct. And if this judge follows the path he clearly laid out today, the answer is already written.